I wake up this morning and go to start getting ready to head up to do some work at the donut shop. And I pull out my phone to get ready to go, and the screen will not light up at all. And I'm thinking maybe it died or something. So I'm trying to charge it. It's making noise. It's doing things, but it won't light up at all. It's finally done, I believe. Because I've had this phone for probably 7 years or so. And I'm not a new phone guy. I just don't like to I'll just keep on going. So over the years, the phone has gone through much abuse because I'm not good with phones. I like to wear basketball shorts. They slide out of basketball short pockets. I've got 3 toddlers who like to chew on phones, throw phones, whatever, So it's gone through it. So the screen's cracked. The glass on the back is falling out. Not too long ago, the button that you push to turn the screen on fell out. Luckily, it has a thing where you double tap the screen and it'll light up, so I could at least get it to light up. But if it ever died or turned off, I just get a paper clip and jam it in where the button's supposed to be, to get it to turn back on. For years now, it hasn't charged. I've always just had to use one of those little pads that you put on the back. But most of those suck, and they don't really, they end up not really doing very good. Look, it's clicking right now. I don't know if you can hear it. So, over the years, a lot of the similar things can happen to us, if you think about it. Physical breaks, like the screen or the glass on the back, kind of start to fatigue us. But even deeper than that, you can think of spiritual breaks, whenever the charging quits working. Because a lot of times plans change and things don't really go the way you want them to. And the way we react whenever things change and our plans begin to fail us, the way we react will begin to affect our spiritual lives. And sometimes we react and we draw back and we forget that, hey, that charging's important. That spiritual time connecting with God and refilling is important. And without that function, eventually we'll begin to give out. Without, when we start to leave these things. And we can even come up with temporary fixes, right? So I'll just shove a paper clip in the hole and make it work. But eventually, whenever we just make things work, whenever on the inside we're actually breaking down, and instead we just force the smile when we go to church, or we just force the handshakes, or we just tell everybody that we're doing fine, but on the inside, we're actually breaking down over the years. Till eventually maybe even your light quits working. And you can force people for a while to see it, but eventually that screen quits lighting up, the light goes away, and people start to not be able to see the light through you anymore. People won't be able to read you anymore. So that's not what I was going to preach on today. I didn't know my phone was going to break. But unfortunately, everything that I had prepared that I was going to preach on was on a phone. So it kind of restructured whenever I began to sit down this morning and looking at the same verses that I was going to preach on, looking at the same verses that, to be quite honest, I'm just being transparent here, the whole time I was preparing them felt forced. It felt like, man, this isn't really connecting. Where is the Spirit in this message? Is this just me? What am I forcing here? So I began to restructure them after losing all my notes. I got to force this all back together again. And God begins to show me that maybe that phone quit working for a reason, because maybe He had something else for me to say today. So I think I've been sent with a message this morning For one, that if your phone's on its last leg, go get a new one before it's too late. For two, that plans change like they did this morning, and the way you react determines a lot to do with the way God can minister in you and through you. So we're going to start in Acts chapter 16. This is our main scripture for the sermon today, Acts chapter 16, and we're going to start in verse 22. And they're on this missions trip in Philippi, and they're wanting to spread the gospel, and they've made plans. They're like, this is what we're here to do. And they begin to preach, and they begin to call out to spirits, and they begin to deliver those who are being tortured, and they have this experience with this girl. And it wasn't the spiritual things that happened that frustrated the people. It was the fact that they lost their hope for money, right? They lost their hope for their money. So they call out to the guards, and they have Paul and Silas drug into the marketplace before the rulers, and they begin to beat them, and they begin to stone them. And they begin to torture them, and they inflicted many blows upon them, and they threw them into prison. And you got to think, Paul and Silas did not plan for this to happen. I don't believe that they would have ever planned that, hey, we're on a direct mission from God. We're following His orders. We're doing the things that He's called us to do. I bet you we're going to get thrown in prison. I bet you we're going to get beat with rods and have stones thrown at us. You know, they didn't plan for these things to happen. But whenever God's people step into a culture that's not living by God's word, it begins to upset the people in that culture. Not because they were preaching God. You see, oftentimes the culture hears us preaching God, but as long as we stay in our own little private churches and our own little bubbles, then they're okay with it. You guys can have your God, you can do your thing, but whenever it started to disturb the people living there, and it began to take away from them their hopes of possession and money and the things that they really want to obtain, when it began to contrast and contradict the things they wanted, then it began to disturb the people. And they cried out, and they had them thrown into jail and beat, and it was never part of the plan. Now, we also need to think about this prison that they were thrown into, because it's easy for us to just picture them sitting in a cell, maybe with like a gate or something and some chains, or maybe even your head just goes straight to like our modern jails, and they're easy now. This wasn't the way that the Romans structured these jails. You see, it said that they had them thrown into the inner jail. And if you think about the way this jail was structured, it would have had an outer courtyard that was open to the light and air. Anybody could enter into this courtyard. It was open to the public. But then it had an inner section that was locked, and it was guarded. And you had to be let into this inner section. But then also this part where they were thrown, or there was this middle section, then there's the inner section, and this inner section is considered like the maximum security prison, right? And basically what it is just a hole in the ground, about like a sewer hole, that they would just get thrown into. It had no windows. It was in the ground, in the substrate, dark, no windows, full of filth, probably rats. They're thrown into this sewer hole of filth. And then they're put their feet into these stocks. And we think of their feet in these stocks, and we think of like the little wood thing, and their feet are just kind of like shackled, so what? They can't escape, or they can't get up or anything. But there's more to that. See, the Romans are really good at making people hurt. Think of the cross. They know what they're doing. They're not just saying, let's put these things on their feet so that they can't get up, they can't try to climb out, they can't escape. They're thinking, let's put these on them, and let's give them the slowest, most agonizing pain and torture that we can do. So they put their feet in these, and they lock them in, and there's multiple holes, right? And they stretch their feet into the most awkward, furthest apart ones they can, so that it causes this unnatural stretching in their legs. And when they're sitting on their butts, on the ground with their feet stretched like this, it's going to start pulling on their spine and their back until they start slowly aching and agonizing pain for hours and days upon a time. Their spine is going to begin to break down and wear out. So they're being caused maximum pain in probably some of the worst living conditions they could have been thrown, after being beat with rods and stoned. So we're going to continue reading in verse 25. It says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing. We are all here. And the jailer called for lights and rushed in. And trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their wounds. And he was baptized at once, he and all of his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set food before them. And he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. And we're going to stop right there. So it was about midnight. Paul and Silas start praying and singing hymns. They had made a decision. They made this midnight decision. Midnight, the darkest part begins to set in. They've been down there for hours in pain. And you got to think that they had been thinking, this isn't what we planned. This isn't what we thought was going to happen. We came here to preach the word. We came here to spread truth and love and the gospel. And instead we have found ourselves inflicted by wounds, thrown into this prison. Our spines are beginning to ache. We're in extreme stress. There's filth and rats and darkness all around us. And our decision, the way we react for whenever plans change, is going to affect the way that God can speak to us and through us. So as they're sitting down here, they made their decision. How are we going to react? And what did they do? They began praying and singing hymns to God. And it was through this decision that God began an extreme conversion. So let's start with that first slide. That there was an extreme shift in plans. They did not plan on the reality of the prison, the windowless, dark, disgusting sewer hole of a prison, while their feet were being stretched and pain in their back and their spine. But they decided to make this midnight decision. They began to start praising. Go to this next slide. Two, the pit is a sanctuary. This pit began. The Roman prison, as we discussed, think about what we just talked about. There was an outer court, there was a middle section, and there was the darkest, most inner part, set apart from everything else, down in this pit. And as I was reading this, and I began to research, I said, I kind of want to know what this prison was like. And I researched it, and I found this picture of what it would have been, the outside, the middle, the inside. It struck in my head, wow, that looks just like the way they built the temple. With the outermost court, the middle, where people began to being brought in, and then what? The holiest of holies. The inside-most part, where there was no light. It was secured, secluded, and put away, and nobody was allowed in except once a year the priest. And so I start thinking about the similarities between this structure of the Roman prison and the structure of the temple. And I started thinking, in the Old Testament, the Spirit resided in the Holy of Holies, in that inside-most place. But in the New Testament, where does the Spirit reside? Inside of us. We become the temples. So by this point, these men have already experienced the outpouring of the Spirit whenever the veil was torn and the Spirit was lit out and now is living inside of them. Did you hear that? My phone's still working. And I can't even open it to put it on mute. So the Spirit is living in them, but these guards had no idea that when they took these two men, they were taking that same Spirit that was in the Holy of Holies, that was inside of these two men, and they were shoving it back down into a hole, back into a new Holy of Holies. But what happened last time the Spirit was in a Holy of Holies? There was an earthquake, and the veil ripped, and the Spirit was lit out. Now the Spirit's being shoved back into a new Holy of Holies, and what happens? There's an earthquake, and the Spirit is lit back out. You cannot contain the Spirit of God in the darkest places. You cannot contain the Spirit of God into any prison, into any confinement. The Spirit of God is poured out and living in us. And we are sent out. And we are given the mission. And we go out and we begin to spread this gospel. We begin to teach people about this Spirit that resides in us, and how whenever you accept Jesus and you begin to love Jesus, you get to have this Spirit too. And so we go out with these high hopes and these high expectations that we're set on this holy divine mission, and we think that everything's just going to go perfectly the way we want it to. And then your phone breaks and the plans have to change. Plans change. We think we know what God's going to do, but we don't know. We are living in God's timing, and we are following His calling. So let's go to that next slide. There's some spiritual chains at play here. The way we react changes the way we get to interact with God. So there's one more. Go to the next one. Here's 5 of them. When unexpected things happen, the way you react can put you into many different chains if you don't react in a way where we stay with God at the center of our praise and prayers. Number 1 is a chain of control. You're trying to stay in control instead of understanding that God is in control, and instead of understanding that whenever God's in control, He gets to change the plans that you had made up in your head. Nothing really frustrates me more than like a last-minute change in plans. Story can tell you. I get very frustrated whenever all of a sudden we're not going to the place we said we were going to go at the time we said we were going to go. We're going somewhere else. And so a lot of times it doesn't even matter. It doesn't make a difference. But just because it's not going the way I thought it was going to go, and now I've lost control of what I thought my near future was bringing, I begin to get frustrated, and sometimes my attitude begins to change, and I'm not living in a way where the Spirit is seen in me anymore. Let go of control so that you can break that chain. Number 2, the chain of numbing. A lot of times when things don't go the way we plan, maybe we've lost a job. Somebody early in their life has been taken away from your life that you didn't plan on happening. We can react in a way of saying, I'm just going to numb this. And there's a lot of ways we do it because everybody's thinking, yeah, we turn to alcohol or drugs. There's more. You could turn to alcohol, you could turn to drugs, you can numb the pains, or you could just scroll on your phone to forget the pain, or you could just start eating more to forget the pain, or you could just hyperfixate on that one favorite activity that you do, and there's nothing wrong with that activity, but if you're doing that activity or hobby all the time to mask that pain because it's the only place you can find joy and happiness, instead of turning and finding your joy and happiness in God, it becomes a chain. It's keeping you away from your relationship with Jesus. Number 3, we got the chain of the past. Then that plan wouldn't have failed. We begin to fill our hearts up with this feeling of guilt and shame, and we begin replaying that event over and over. Well, if I would have just done it right the first time, or if I would have done it differently the first time, this great plan that I had would have succeeded. Instead of understanding that that great plan that you had was not the great plan that God had. And just because that plan that you had failed, and now you want to harbor this guilt and shame in your heart, you got to let that go and realize that God has a greater plan than the plan you had. Let go of the guilt. It wasn't yours anyways. It's not what God had for you anyways. Number 4, isolation. And I had a falling out with that pastor in that church. So the way I'm going to react might result in pulling away from community, pulling away from those other relationships because I already lost one and I can't bear the thought of losing another. So how about I just pull out of it myself before they pull out and hurt me first? And we begin to isolate ourselves. We isolate our hearts. We get out of our communities, we pull away from our families, and we pull away from our churches, and we put on chains. And it begins to limit the way people can see God in us and through us. And the last one is the chain of doubt. Or am I actually doing enough to earn God's grace? That chain that you're putting on is stripping you of your self-identity. Because whenever God calls our identity, he says we are children of God, and that we live in his goodness, and that we accept all that comes with that, including the changed plans. Whenever your plans change, instead of doubting, you just follow. Because when Jesus asks some of his first disciples, and he said, just follow me, Some of them at times doubted. Remember the one who said, well, maybe I need to stay here and bury my father first, Or other ones, they just right away followed and they didn't doubt him at all. But whenever you doubt, you're stripping yourself of who he's calling you to be. And I want to clarify that doesn't mean you're never going to doubt. But whenever doubt becomes your chain, when it begins to control you, whenever you doubt and then you choose to stay in a situation of doubt, or you can choose to say, I've doubted, I don't understand, it's okay that I've doubted, I'm going to choose to follow God anyway. So these chains are a lot like the chains that Paul and Silas faced while they're in prison. Right? We can begin to look at this as a way of a form of symbolism in the text. That they were put in these holes and they had their identity stripped from them. And they began to be weighed down with chains and their feet began to be shackled. And they had a choice. Do I want to stay in these chains or do I want to break these chains? And the choice they made was that before God took them out of that dark place, while they were still in doubt, while they were still in torture and in pain, they began praying and they began worshiping. Before God intervened, they said, I'm going to worship despite this change in plans. We can even understand a little bit of maybe what they might have been singing. They didn't just have all these songs that we have nowadays, but they had, what was their hymns that they would have been singing? It would have been the book of Psalms, right? That was their hymn book. So it might have even been something like Psalm 118. I've got that book marked here. Psalm 118. In Psalm 118, the chains, they were singing these hymns. They chose to choose praise and worship while they were in the darkness. So let's go to that next slide, because there's 3 truths for breaking these chains. One is flexibility. To the outside circumstances in your life, you are showing God that you have faith in what He has for you. Proverbs chapter 16 verse 9 says that the heart of the man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. the heart of the man plans his way. That's what I was just saying earlier. Like, I get so frustrated when plans change because my heart has already planned the way I was going to go today. But the Lord sometimes has a bigger plan that actually establishes your steps. And when you think you're going to go one way, he might do something like your phone screen just turning off to pull you somewhere else and show you. Like I said, I'm reading the same passage, and I ended up with a whole new sermon this morning. Because I tried to tell you my words this morning, and God had to remind me that his words come out of this pulpit. For 2, what's in your heart comes out in the and learn it and study it. Then when you find yourself in the dark place, in the hole, and you're faced with chains that are going to hold you down, and the lies begin to creep in of self-doubt, of, oh, I need to be in control, or if you just numb it, it'll go away. The words that are already established on your heart are the truth that's going to break the chains. You have to work now to prepare yourself for the dark places. You don't wait till you're in the dark place to start trying to learn the hymns, because I doubt those guards gave them the book of Psalms to study while they were in there. They had to pull it out of their heart. And the last thing is that the people are watching how we handle the detours. Acts, we saw that when they began singing, what does it say? The other prisoners were listening. All the other prisoners there heard those prayers. All the other prisoners there heard those songs. And I'm telling you right now, you can be sitting in one of these chairs in this church sanctuary and be shackled by chains. And other people are going to hear your prayers and your songs. And when you find yourself sitting in here in chains and other people are watching how you react, guess what? They might be in chains too. The other prisoners are listening too. And if you're struggling with something, whenever you can find truth of God's word and break that chain, their chains might just fall off too. Because it doesn't say that they began to sing and praise, and then around midnight in their singing and praising, Paul and Silas's chains fell off and they were free. It doesn't say that. It says everybody's chains fell off and every door was open and everybody was ready to walk free. But there's one more thing, because someone else was watching too, and that was the jail guard. And when he woke up, he saw their decisions too. He saw that they decided to stay right there. They could have ran. They could have showed fear and ran away, but instead they sat right there and they waited for the guard to come in too. And when the guard saw that all the doors were open, he assumed they had all fled, and he got ready to kill himself, because the law in Roman tradition is that the prisoner guard who was watching those prisoners, if they get out, you now get to endure the same punishment that they were planned to endure. And like I said, the Romans are really good at making people hurt. So whatever punishment was in line that they were going to torture these men with was now going to come to that prison guard. And he decided maybe it would be more honorable to just go ahead and kill myself now than to be publicly humiliated with a slow, painful, suffering death in front of a crowd of people. So he said, I'll just kill myself now. But Paul and Silas called out and said, don't harm yourself. We're still here. They showed him their reaction. They said, you have changed the course of our plans, but we're reacting in strength, steadfastness, and faith because we have a faith in a God who's way bigger and way stronger than any of these chains that you're trying to hold us with. And when we began to praise, despite being faced with these chains, and we began to pray despite being faced with your chains, the truth is that these chains will break. And we're going to stand right here and let you witness. And through their faith, that jailer got to be baptized, and his whole family was baptized with him. And they began to rejoice that they got the opportunity to believe and be saved through Jesus Christ. These are the greater plans that God might have had whenever he detoured them and allowed them to be put in this prison. They thought that they had it all figured out. They knew what they were coming to do. But God said, hold on, there's somebody that I need you to go meet. And the only way I can get you there to meet him is that I might have to put you through a little bit of trials and suffering. And whenever you answer in faith, despite being faced with this, I'll break those chains for you. I'll set you free. Because the word says, who Christ sets free, what? Is free indeed. No man can hold you down. No chains can hold you in. Whenever you believe in Jesus, you are saved. And this man was baptized, and his whole family was brought to the Lord with him. And it says that when it was day, the magistrates sent the police, saying, let those men go. And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, the magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore come now and go in peace. Right? They chose to stay in the jail. They didn't even leave. The jailer got to be witness to, but they still weren't going to go because the jailer was still going to have to endure the punishment if the people went. So they stayed, and then through God's miraculous intervention, they came in the morning and said, let these men go, because they realized something. They said, but Paul said to them, they have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do not now throw us out secretly. No, let them come themselves and take us out. The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of prison and visited Lydia. And when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed. And they were still let go. And the people came and apologized when they realized that they were Roman citizens, because it was actually illegal for them to have done any of this to a Roman citizen. They did not realize that these men were Roman citizens. So I'm telling you today that you can be sitting in here right now And this place can be sanctuary, or this place can be jail. And it's your choice. Just like this jail was made into their midnight sanctuary, they could have just as easily let the chain stay on. Today, there are people sitting in this room who have experienced a change in plans. You did not plan to be where you are right now. You did not plan to have lost that loved one yet. You did not plan to have lost that job, or you did not plan to be pulled into some situation where you have absolutely no experience and you're going to have to learn how to make it work. Or maybe you weren't ready yet for what God called you into. Your plan has changed, and you got to choose how to react. So today you can choose to pick up a chain, and you can begin to numb it. You can begin to doubt yourself. You can begin to doubt God. You can begin to try to keep control to yourself. Or you can just stay in the past and replay that failure over and over. Or you can isolate yourself. You can run and hide, stay in your house, find yourself slipping further into depression or alcoholism or drug abuse. You can pick up that chain, or right now, while you're still in your dark place, you don't have to wait for God to deliver you, for you begin to praise and worship. Right now, you can begin to praise and worship. So we're going to open altars. And if you found yourself in a dark place and you don't know how